My family ignored me my whole life and skipped my wedding. But when I told the truth, my sister's perfect wedding was destroyed, with only 60 of 200 guests showing up. I'm 28 years old. I work in digital marketing, and honestly, I never thought I'd end up telling this story. But here we are. I got married like 8 months ago. It was a small but nice ceremony. You know, nothing ostentatious but meaningful to me and Andrew, my husband. The thing is, my parents and my younger sister, Melissa, didn't go. They didn't even show up. And when I say that was just the tip of the iceberg of a lifetime of feeling invisible in my own family, believe me, I'm not exaggerating even a little bit. I guess I should start from the beginning so all of this makes sense. I grew up feeling like the living room furniture that nobody notices until it gets in the way. You know what I mean? Melissa is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, my parents acted like she was the star of the show and I was, I don't know, the background prop. It's not like they actively mistreated me or anything. It was just like I didn't exist in the same way that she existed. For them, Melissa was always the pretty one, the one who got good grades effortlessly, the one with the magnetic personality. While I was, well, ordinary, I guess. Common brown hair, average height, decent but not exceptional grades, like the definition of mediocre in every sense according to my parents' standards. When we were kids, Melissa got the best gifts at Christmas and I ended up with generic stuff they'd clearly bought last minute. She had elaborate birthday parties with all her friends at expensive places, and I got cake at home with just my grandparents. In middle school, when Melissa wanted dance or piano lessons, my parents paid without thinking twice. But when I asked to join the photography club that required like a $200 annual membership, they told me it was a waste of money. The thing is, when you're a kid, you normalize these things because you don't know any other reality. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong or that I just wasn't as interesting as my sister. The worst part wasn't even the gifts or the money, but the emotional attention, you know. My parents went to all of Melissa's events, every recital, every presentation, every tiny thing she did. I had an art exhibition in high school where I presented a photography project I'd worked on for months. I told them weeks in advance, reminded them multiple times, and on the day of the event, they just didn't show up. They said they forgot because Melissa had a volleyball game the same day. She wasn't even playing. She was a substitute and sat on the bench the whole time. I remember standing there watching all my classmates with their families, taking pictures, and feeling like an idiot for having expected my parents to show up. And Melissa, God, Melissa knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just that my parents favored her. It's that she took advantage of it and reveled in it. She bullied me constantly. Comments about my appearance, about my clothes, about basically everything I did. She'd tell me things like, I was boring, that nobody would ever love me, that I was a loser. And when I tried to defend myself or complain to my parents, they'd say it was just sister stuff, that Melissa was just joking, that I was too sensitive. Looking back now, I realized they were basically gaslighting me my entire childhood and adolescence. But at the time, I just thought there was something fundamentally wrong with me. College was my escape. Honestly. I went to study in another city, got a part-time job, made friends who actually valued me. It was the first time I felt like I could breathe without that constant pressure of never being enough. I met Andrew in my 3rd year. We worked at the same coffee shop near campus. He was, and is, the most genuinely good person I've ever met, like one of those humans who restore your faith in humanity. We became friends first, then started dating. And it was basically the healthiest and most normal relationship I'd experienced in my life. When we'd been together for like 2 years, Andrew met my family at Christmas. Afterward, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, Danielle, your family treats you like you're invisible. Do you realize that? And honestly, it was the first time someone validated what I'd felt my whole life. It was liberating and devastating at the same time, because it meant I wasn't crazy, that it was really happening. But it also meant facing the fact that my family had never loved me the way parents are supposed to love their children. We kept dating. Andrew was always super supportive and understood why I kept some distance from my family. After 4 years together, we got engaged. We threw a small engagement party, invited family and close friends, nothing fancy but nice. And that's where things got weird. In a way I didn't even anticipate. Melissa, who by then was like 24 and working in some important corporate position, my parents wouldn't stop bragging about it, came to the party with her boyfriend at the time. Everything seemed normal, until Andrew pulled me aside and told me he'd seen my parents consoling Melissa in a corner. She was crying. I asked him what had happened, and he told me, with a genuinely confused face, that he'd overheard my mom telling Melissa not to worry, that she'd have her special moment soon too, that I had just gotten ahead but that didn't mean anything. I mean, my sister was crying at my engagement party because she was jealous that I was going to get married first. And my parents, instead of telling her she was being ridiculous and should be happy for me, were consoling her, as if I'd done something terrible by getting engaged to the love of my life. I didn't confront anyone that night because I didn't want to ruin the party, but that image stayed with me. Andrew was furious. He wanted to say something to my parents right there, but I convinced him to let it go. In retrospect, I should have let him say something, but I guess part of me still had that pathetic hope that someday things would change, that someday they'd actually see me. Planning the wedding was relatively easy, because Andrew and I wanted something simple. We didn't have much money and frankly didn't want to go into debt for a single party. We decided to have a ceremony at a small venue with like 50 people, reception included. Nothing extravagant but nice. I sent the invitations 3 months in advance, called my parents to confirm they'd received them, even texted them with all the details. I did everything possible to make sure there was no confusion. The wedding day came and, well, my parents weren't there. Melissa wasn't either. I kept checking my phone during the ceremony, thinking maybe they'd arrive late, that there was traffic, that something had happened. But nothing. The ceremony was beautiful anyway. My friends were there, some distant cousins came. Andrew's family was incredibly warm to me, but I'm not going to lie. It hurt like hell to see that empty space where my parents should have been sitting. The next day, back from our mini weekend honeymoon, I called them. My mom answered all casual, like nothing had happened. And when I asked her why they hadn't come to my wedding, she literally told me, "What wedding? We didn't receive any invitation, Danielle." And that's where I realized what they were doing. They were pretending they never received the invitation so they wouldn't have to admit they consciously decided not to go. I told them I'd sent them the invitation by mail, that I'd confirmed with them over the phone, that I had the text messages where I gave them all the details. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then my dad took the phone and told me there had obviously been some error with the mail, that they never received anything official. They were basically gaslighting me again, trying to make me believe I was the crazy one, that I'd made the mistake. I hung up the phone and cried for hours. Andrew was furious. He wanted to go confront them in person, but I just wanted to forget everything. And then he told me something else he'd been keeping because he didn't want to ruin the wedding. Turns out at the engagement party, he'd overheard my dad telling someone that Melissa was devastated because I was getting married before her, that it wasn't fair because she'd always been the one dreaming of a perfect wedding, and that was probably why my parents weren't very excited about my engagement. I mean, my parents actively didn't want me to get married first because that somehow took the spotlight away from Melissa. After that, I cut contact. I didn't answer calls, didn't respond to messages, basically blocked them from my life. It was liberating and painful at the same time. Because on one hand, I was finally setting boundaries, but on the other hand, I was admitting that my parents were never going to change, that I was never going to have the relationship I'd always wanted with them. Like 8 months of total silence went by. I went on with my life, working, enjoying being newly married, building a life with Andrew that felt real and authentic for the first time. And then I found out from a cousin that Melissa had gotten engaged. And oh God, the wedding my parents were planning for her was absurd. Super expensive venue, guest list of over 200 people, designer dress, literally everything money could buy. They were probably spending 10 times what my entire wedding cost, maybe more. Things got interesting when several of my cousins started contacting me asking what had happened, why my parents hadn't gone to my wedding, and I, honestly, told them the truth. I didn't exaggerate, didn't make anything up, just told them exactly what happened. That I sent the invitations, that I confirmed with them, that they simply decided not to go, and then pretended they never received the invitation. I told them about the years of favoritism, about how they always prioritized Melissa, about everything. Turns out many of my relatives had already noticed these dynamics for years, but had never said anything because, you don't get involved in other families' business. But hearing the complete story directly from me made them react. Several of them, including my closest aunts and uncles, decided not to go to Melissa's engagement party. and several more said they wouldn't go to the wedding either. My parents totally panicked. They called me Eid, unblocked their numbers after a few months because I thought maybe they wanted to apologize, yelling at me that I was sabotaging my sister's wedding, that I was spreading malicious rumors, that I was being vindictive and cruel. My mom was literally hysterical on the phone saying, how could I do this to my own sister, that I was ruining the most important day of her life. And something inside me just broke, or rather, was liberated. I yelled back at them for the first time in my life. I told them everything I'd been holding in for years, about the favoritism, about how they made me feel invisible, about how they allowed Melissa to bully me, about how they didn't even have the decency to come to my wedding. I told them I hadn't spread any rumors, that I'd only told the truth when asked, and that if that made them look bad, it was because their actions made them look bad, not me. My dad told me I was bitter, that I'd always been insecure and jealous of Melissa, that my feelings were my problem and I shouldn't project them onto them. My mom added that they'd always treated us equally, that I was making things up, that maybe I should see a therapist because I clearly had problems with reality. And then, they basically disowned me. They told me that if I couldn't be happy for my sister and stop causing drama, then they didn't want me in their lives. I hung up and, honestly, I felt relief. Like, I'd finally said everything I needed to say. I'd finally stood up for myself. And even though it hurt that they rejected me so explicitly, at least I didn't have to pretend anymore that we had a normal relationship. I didn't have to keep hoping that someday they'd see me, value me, truly love me, but Melissa wasn't going to leave things like that. She contacted me like a week later, first by text and then by phone call, demanding that I apologize to her and our parents, that I fix things with the extended family, that I basically undo all the damage I'd caused. When I told her no, that I hadn't done anything wrong, she exploded. She called me everything, that I was a loser, that I'd always been a failure, that I wasn't even worth the oxygen I consumed. She basically showed her true face, no filters, no pretending to be the perfect sister. Then she tried to contact Andrew directly, sent him messages saying I was lying, that I'd always had mental problems, that I was manipulative. Andrew, bless him, responded with a super short message telling her he'd been present at our engagement party, that he'd seen how our parents consoled her instead of being happy for us, and not to contact him again. He blocked her immediately after. My parents made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. They told the whole family I was lying out of jealousy, that Melissa was always going to have a bigger and nicer wedding because, well, she was more successful and had more friends, and that I couldn't stand not being the center of attention. They painted the whole situation as if I were this bitter and envious person who couldn't be happy for her younger sister. But the thing is, the family had already heard me first. They'd already seen the patterns for years, and many of them were already fed up with my parents' behavior anyway. So their strategy basically completely backfired. More family decided not to go to Melissa's wedding after hearing how my parents were talking about me. In the end, I think only like 60 people went to that wedding that was supposed to have over 200 guests, and most of them were Melissa's friends and my parents' work colleagues who didn't know anything about the family drama. I heard from a cousin that the atmosphere at the wedding was super awkward, that you could tell my parents were devastated by the lack of family, that Melissa spent half the reception crying because her perfect wedding had been ruined. Part of me felt satisfaction. I'm not going to lie. That dark part that had been repressed for years finally had its moment of vindication. But another part of me just felt sadness about everything that could have been if my parents had been capable of loving both daughters equally, if they hadn't been so obsessed with appearances and favoritism. Now, several months after all this drama, I'm in a strange but peaceful place. I have no contact with my parents or Melissa, and honestly, I don't miss that toxic dynamic. Andrew and I are doing well, building our own family. No, I'm not pregnant, but we're thinking about it eventually. I've been going to therapy because it turns out growing up feeling invisible leaves some scars that need work. The extended family that supported me is still in contact with me. We celebrate some holidays together, and it's weird but nice to have this sense of belonging I never had with my parents. My aunts and uncles told me recently that they always knew something wasn't right in how they treated me, but they didn't know how deep the problem was until I finally spoke up. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have handled things differently, if maybe I was too harsh, or if I should have stayed quiet. But then I remember the feeling of being at my own wedding, waiting for my parents to arrive, knowing deep down they wouldn't, and I realize I didn't do anything wrong. I just stopped protecting people who never protected me, stopped keeping secrets that only benefited them, stopped sacrificing my emotional well-being to maintain a facade of happy family that was never real. Last week, Andrew and I went to dinner with some of my cousins. We laughed, shared stories, and at one point I realized that for the first time in my life, I felt completely comfortable being myself in front of my family. I wasn't trying to be more interesting, prettier, more successful. I was just being Danielle, and that was enough for them. And I guess that's all I ever wanted from my parents, for me to be enough just as I am. I don't know if someday my parents or Melissa will understand what they did, if they'll want to repair the relationship, or if we'll just keep being strangers who share DNA. Honestly, right now, I don't care as much as I thought I would. I'm building my own life, my own traditions, my own definition of family, and it turns out that feels a lot better than spending years trying to earn love that was never available to me. And that, I think, is enough for now.